So once again, thank you so much for joining us here today with us at our conference about co-creating a regenerative world. And we appreciate that you all participate on it. So please give us your questions and comments. We tried the very best since it's a full time ahead that we have just 1 hour, but we'll make our best if we see possible to ask some questions, but feel free to do it. My name is Liliana Domingues. I'm founder and managing director from Mar na Vida, which is the organizer of this conference. And I will be the moderator of this session. With me is also Beatriz Silva, which is the marketing coordinator of Mar na Vida. She's joined us. And also joining us is Alexandra Rentroia, who is also part of a Mar na Vida team. She's the organizational development coordinator of it, okay? And today, in this session, we are very pleased to give a warm hug and listen to Sharam, which in fact is in Spain at the moment. We are here in Lisbon, for the ones that don't know, at a place which is called Fábrica Braço de Prata, which I invite you all over the world to visit us here also. And also Sharam, of course, since we are 5,000 kilometers away only. So when you can...
less, 500, I think.
Yeah, yes. More or less, yes. So 500. I'm sorry, not 5,000. I'm sorry. So Sharam is the founder and CEO of Humanation and the executive partner of Soros Gabinet. I hope I spelled well. Okay. He's focusing on development of the ecosystem and community to co-create through Conscious Regenerative Business Design. Sharam is an ecological economist with expertise in development of disruptive innovation projects and funding, principally through European and national research and innovation programs. So, Sharam, how a person... Hello. I want to ask you, how a person with an economical background and banking, as I know you have, and a lot of international financial, get involved in issues regarding circular economy and regenerative economy, things like this. So what actually is your story? So can you please tell a little bit about your...
Yes, I think I think, first of all, I think it's an honor to be here, and this is a really wonderful opportunity, and very timely is what we need to be doing, talking about these things. And after summer, getting onto some hard action as well, because just talking, we've done a lot of talking over the last years, but this is a good time. So I think for me, I landed in the UK in 1985, and I felt like I just missed the 70s revolution, and Thatcher was there, so I was a little bit like, as they say in England, gutted, that I was upset that I missed all that happened. I think that coming from an Eastern country, I'm from Iran, so we have some of those, let's say, ancient wisdom traditions that were more present in my culture, but less the technological and scientific, so that came through colonialization, as you know. So that's kind of a massive transformation when you take a flight into a European space where they've already gone through all that scientific revolution, and the suffragists, the women's rights movement, the sexual revolution that happened in the 70s, but it was more about diversity really, and not really about that. So everything that happened in the 70s, that was all about, but even earlier in the 20th century, the existentialism, the Jungian, reconnecting with the Eastern also philosophy, and also some of these ancient wisdom was coming back. But even in kind of spiritual, more Christian traditions and everything, it was already very present, this idea of who we are, why we're here, the philosophical, quest. The link between the philosophy of the Persians and the Greeks were very much present in the history, of that area. So I think for me, having seen that suddenly I was landed in a very mechanistic, reductionist. I can say all this in hindsight because I didn't know that at the time, obviously. Suddenly everything was so mechanistic. And when I studied economics, it was like we were reduced to these utilitarian, we talk about utility being the only way we make decisions is to maximize our own egotistic kind of quest, what we're looking for. And so it's just like everything was so limited, to a part of me that felt like I wasn't able to express myself as a human being, but I had to behave in a certain way to fit into the system. And classical economics is very much around isolating things and looking at things where they say ceteris paribus. It means you experiment something without looking at everything else that's going on around it. And then you talk about externalities as if it's something just out there that's, okay, we have these externalities, but let's get on with business. There's so much in the language of economics and business that is reductionist because, that's where it developed into. Through sadly, science lost a lot of the holistic approach that it originally was very much within science. And it got reduced to what we now have, which is neoliberal economics, which is the most purest form of almost executing, capital in this transactional way. And even us as humans being reduced to consumers who are these like atomic units or human resources that behave in order to allow this mechanistic system to function in the most efficient way. So I found that whole story very limiting. And in fact, I would say that it was probably caused to even some psychological stress, let's call it. And having to go through this regenerative kind of even journey myself from when I was 20, when I had some depression even, I had to look at how do you reconcile these two worlds? I got very interested in psychology, in philosophy and so on. So I had to reconcile these two worlds, but then I became an activist also. So I really resonate with Giles's story of how in London, there was, and also this environmental movement, there was a lot of partying going on as well, but as you were saying, the raves, but it was all part of different forms of expression, the music, the activism, the environmental activism, then the anti-war movement, because the war also in Iraq, which was a country that we were actually at war, which is one of the reasons why I left Iran at the time, but for many other reasons, because it wasn't the opportunities weren't great for growing up there, and I was privileged to be able to leave. So I think the war with Iraq, was also another example of this, mechanistic, this aggressive approach for natural resources, because it was all about oil, and the story that was told was so different. So I was very active in trying to say, look, this is not what the story is about, and also really coming to Giles's, conclusion was that I saw a lot of activism as being angry and not really giving the solutions. So when I was working in a corporation at the time, and I was within a team of transformation and process engineering, process management, looking at making the business better, implementing systems and so on. And it was a strategic team. It was a lot of fun looking at the business, how it runs. I learned a lot about how organizations work. But also I saw that you kind of have to either go into the politics of organizations, which is this hierarchical military system of, almost organized like an army, where you have to manage people as resources, and you have to deal with all these politics and infighting between different territories and departments and silos. Or you could be a specialist. So I chose a specialist path because I just said, no way I'm going to play that game. And as a specialist, I felt much more comfortable because I was like an internal consultant. I was trying to do the best of my work. But then that also even got limited to, they would just like downsize the company, getting rid of loads of people, and then recruit them again 2 years later because they needed them, but they had to cut the costs. And they would implement systems that were completely useless, but they had these deals. So there was a lot of things that didn't make sense in the way decisions were being made in companies. So just to say, like, for me, when I had the opportunity in 2013, when my role got redundant in Spain, because I moved here, I suddenly saw an opportunity to bring all this together. I did a master's in environmental management and global environmental change. So it gave me this huge perspective of what's happening, the mega trends in environmental and social, let's say, what's happening in terms of the crisis, but also the challenges and also the opportunities. And I try to reconcile that back with business. So when I got into the world of funding, I saw an opportunity to get funds into innovation, which is where I started working with innovation projects and startups. And I saw that SMEs are really the life and blood of our communities and societies, and startups are the kind of agitators that are creating all this innovation in a much more agile way many times. And I saw the whole innovation ecosystem as being, something that is definitely needs to be transformed to become more regenerative, but it's actually where a lot of innovation is happening. So I see an opportunity for getting funding, creating an ecosystem for regenerative business. So going to more, my philosophy is very aligned, in fact, to what Giles was saying, because in my heart, I'm an ecologist and I believe in, the common good. And that's another thing that in economy, the commons is like something that economy can't deal with. That's why we call it the crisis of the commons. So it's expected that the public organizations, the governments and NGOs deal with that. So again, having seen the failures of government and public and NGOs in really being able to tackle, or many times the NGOs are just, scrapping for donations and trying to get money to fix these problems, but really I don't see that as a sustainable future.
Yes.
And in fact, we see them collapsing, and at the same time, the government has failed, so we see that citizens have to take back, and I see business activism as an opportunity for small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs to become activists and move into this regenerative space, to take the role that governments and NGOs will no longer, be able to fulfill to a sufficient level. I think the governments and NGOs are NGOs are fantastic at pointing the finger and solving the firefighting, the crisis. A lot of the things that they're tackling are not so strategic, but a lot of reports, for example, they do are very important in bringing to our attention what's going on. But government, on the other hand, yes, Europe, we're lucky to be here because they're very much leading in the policies towards, the more green future, but it's still relative to what needs to be done. Sadly, the rest of the world, at least from a policy point of view, they're far away from even where Europe is. And Europe is the most advanced in terms of green policies with the new Green Deal and so on. But still, I see because of the, this inertia that corporations and institutions have, that the real solution is going to be bottom up. Mm-hmm. And it's going to come from citizens, from people, from entrepreneurs, and from these new startups. So let's make these startups, let's make these businesses have the support and the ecosystem and the community so that they can thrive within this new paradigm, which we're all learning, as Giles was saying, is that it's a process of learning. I go from what I learned in the 80s with the yuppie mindset and, then having to, the idea, that's why I got into banking, because my family was saying, you need to get a secure job, you need to make money. And then I thought, this is not for me. So the day I left the banking degree, I never went back into a bank. I did an internship in an investment bank, and I said, this is not for me. But I learned a lot about how the banking system works and the financial system works. And there was huge amounts of speculation. The global financial system is, it's true what they say, it's rigged. But it's rigged because it's designed by us. And it's designed by us from a certain perspective that lacks this heart, and the whole person perspective that Giles was talking about. So if we redesign that financial system, bearing in mind, the emotional work and everything that is our responsibility as human beings who feel, which is a difficult thing to do these days. We're not trained to feel. So this is something. Oh, I see a poll here.
No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We make some polls in the test. We just have to close the pool, but people continue. Just have to close from the screen the pool, but go ahead.
Yes. So this is really, I think, there's a lot of opportunity now to move on to the next thing. I think you had some questions.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to mention one thing share one thing with you. You mentioned the question about non-profit organizations in business. Actually, I have to say my personal point of view on that. I think we also have to integrate them, because many people see non-profits having purpose, but the thing is that they are not sustainable. They pick it up as being charity, and the money, they are not financially sustainable. So what's the purpose of that? And a separate form for the point of view of seeing business as not going with the purpose, but all we focus on money. So I think we have to have organizations that combine all the points of view. All the economic sustainability has to be there, and the other things are to be there. No mean to have a non-profit what purpose, because all organizations have purpose. All the purpose is humanity, serving humanity in some way. Even making shoes is a purpose. You just have to do it in a good way, in the good way of doing things. Okay, so I think it's important also for you mention that gap that exists with governments and non-profits. So great that you pointed out. So I love to hear your story and how also war somehow impacted you in your path too. So you mentioned that you are very connected with startups, and we in the morning listen so much about big corporates. And startups are a big ecosystem that more and more are developing right now, because we see a lot of people becoming entrepreneurs right now, and maybe with this crisis, as in the 2008 crisis, where so many startups that flourished, maybe the same thing will happen in this moment. So how this kind of startups, in taking in account your experience, how they can be designed in the way that they could be considered as more conscious and regenerative, even more because startups, majority of them are developed by young people. So what we can do about it?
Yeah, I think it's very true that since the 2008 crisis, we had more and more the startup ecosystem here in Spain. Also, there was a lot of unemployment. So we see all these accelerators and startups and funds and so on, and we help a lot of startups, and that I do through Soros Gabinete, which we do the funding. But I think that I still see that a lot of the startups are very much taking the Silicon Valley kind of approach for the model, for accelerating and growth and so on. So what I see is a massive gap in terms of what we are talking about here. And, I think Giles really set the setting in terms of the deepness of, this transformation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, because the startups are looking at, very much technological startups, a lot of the ones that I see, and the funding goes to technology startups. So when you start talking about social enterprises, we're talking about very different business models, and we see innovation in the social enterprise space, but it's very difficult, like we're saying, to compete with the traditional business models. So we see a lot of this innovation. So we need to be able to create the ecosystem to support these startups. So it's one of the things that was mentioned. I will share my screen just very briefly.
Yeah, great.
I see like a stark choice we have a little bit in terms of what we see is the new economy is like this humane value system economy based on bringing the ecosystem thinking, the good science, and the good technology together. Whereas the alternative is, more what we see is happening is this kind of surveillance, capitalism, the platforms, and polarization of society. So this quadruple balance that we're talking about, I think what Giles was talking about, was about how do we bring this purpose to make this balance between ecological, social, and economical all together.
Sorry, just one thing, Sharam. Because meanwhile, Ranko joiner, I just want to ask you. Yeah, Ranko is here. I just want to ask you, Ranko, to unmute meanwhile your micro because it's making some noise, and then you go ahead. We make some questions, okay? Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yes, so what we're talking about is a fundamental change and shift in the way we see the world. So the startups that I work with, a lot of them are still taking a traditional mindset, saying, okay, how are we going to make money? How are we going to, grow into the market and take market share and so on. But some of the startups I'm working with, and that's why through Human Nation, I'm focusing only on the startups that are in the regenerative space. And I work with Soros Gabinete to help them get access to public funding. But that's a more difficult area, but we see that opening up because with the new Green Deal with Europe and a lot of philanthropic funds now and patient capital and all this, we see opportunity for channeling all this more patient investment and funding into these regenerative startups. So the idea with Human Nation is to create let's say, what's a disruptive advisory firm to allow these startups to have access to all the things they need. But all of it from a regenerative point of view, so that purpose is at the heart of, this work that they're doing. And, sometimes this diagram is put in, different forms. But I think the ecology, as we know, is the most important because that's our life supporting system. So I put the circle bigger. The society, we are the human, that make all this happen. And the economical, of course, has to work because otherwise it's not viable either. But it needs to be equitable. So we see that the way the startups are going today, when they come out of these accelerators, they're not necessarily looking for an equitable economic model because they're taking the old model of growth and ownership. So this is also a philosophical approach that is taking what Giles was saying about perennial knowledge, is that our thoughts are what designs everything. So our destiny is defined by our thoughts. This is a very ancient saying that's enshrined in our ancient wisdom. How do you bring that into business? So everything that we have thought about or our philosophies are determining our brand value and impact and our destiny. So what we see today is a design of what we believe and what we believe is true and our value system. So it's very important to go back to that. And that's why I think a lot of this startup and business ecosystem needs to go back into personal development and coaching and what we're talking about. And this is where, for example, the relationship we started talking about with Amana Vida and other people I'm collaborating with is very important to bring that personal aspect into business, because we are the ones that are actually creating these new businesses. So we need to make sure that we have this holistic approach, and we ourselves are healthy and healed, or healing. We can never be healed, but we're healing, towards this process, that we can integrate these better thoughts and better values and better actions, so that we can develop these new better habits and develop better character to then be able to, in 2030, 2040, meet these targets that they're putting for us. Because those targets, they're not going to be met by technology. Maybe 20, 30% can be solved by technology. But if we don't change our behavior, the 20/80 rule is that 80% of our problems are human behavioral problems. And we're not going to come out of this hole of climate change, biodiversity collapse, and social polarity, social inequality, if we don't change our behavior. So this is a big part of transformation, is transforming ourselves and transforming these businesses through transforming ourselves. So I think that has to become part of business development, part of business creation, and part of business design. So I think that's fundamental pillar of what we're trying to do, through this work. And also this is talking about the same thing. I think we've developed over the last, since the Enlightenment, this ego, the reductionist, we know about that, a lot of that side of it, but we haven't developed all the other aspects of ourselves. So we need to become whole people. So to do that, this is talking to the same thing, is how do we become these whole people to embrace the feminine, the relationships, the collaboration, the emotional and intuitive intelligence, the complex system thinking, the ecological mindset, and somehow connect to this universal transpersonal question of why we're here, which, since ancient times we've been asking ourselves. The Greeks have been asking it. The ancient traditions, they all have this transcendental, inquiry about what is our purpose, why we're here, who are we as human beings, and continue to bring that back into our life, because we've lost meaning and purpose because we've been so focused on this mechanistic approach of life that we have lost the rudders, of saying which way we're going to go. It's like not seeing as they say, the wood through the trees, in English. So you lose the forest by looking at the trees, so
yeah.
We need to get that perspective. And the only way we can do that is by connecting to our emotions, to ourselves, and to each other, and to this intuitive power that we have, to make decisions that are the right decisions, and the ones that make us feel good, and to move away from decisions that make us feel bad and that create harm, and design businesses from that perspective. So this is very fundamental in terms of not only focusing on, what feeds our ego, and also, of course, all these things are very important and necessary, but they're not the whole person, that we've been amplifying, I think, over the last 200-300 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, so talking about the fourth sector, I think that the startups that you were talking about, I think the fourth sector is very important here, because we see that there's an overlap, and for making these public sectors more accountable, to make the private sector transform by demonstrating a different way of doing things. And for the social non-profit sector, the NGOs, for them to start looking for more viable business models. So we see a convergence happening within this fourth sector. It's not that the fourth sector is a separate sector. It's an integrative sector.
Integrative sector.
Yeah. So what we are trying to also push is to work solely within this fourth sector in a bottom-up approach. Because we think that's where the fundamental change is happening. So this is to understand that there's no one type of organization that's called the fourth sector. There are hybrid organizations. I think the UK has very advanced legal system. For example, people I'm working with here in the triple balance or triple bottom line association of businesses, which are over 100 businesses in Madrid, across Spain. Now they're expanding across Spain. They started in Madrid. But they are like one of the pillars of the work they're doing is to see how to get the legal framework for the fourth sector developed in Spain. Mm-hmm. Because in UK, for example, where you have community interest companies that are for profit, but their purpose is to serve the community and environmental, ecological interests, they have a legal framework and they have pretty much defined how the ownership and all that is tackled. Whereas in Spain and Italy, we're collaborating with Italians to see how we can develop that in Spain, and I hope we can do it with Portugal and elsewhere. So the idea is, how do we work together to better define what this legal framework is going to be, and so on.
Yeah, but because I just have to point it out, in Portugal, we don't have that kind of framework. You separate companies are companies for profit, and you have non-profit organization. We don't have a framework that supports another way, another frame of being. So the taxes and all, it's always separate. Again,
Yeah.
we don't see again organization as one of serving a community, of serving humanity, but also being balanced with economical and financial part of it and the social part of it, all what organization really is. So we don't have, in Portugal, we don't have that kind of framework. So it's a very big gap. For example, like an organization for Armada Vida, for example, it's a very big gap. So
Yeah,
I
so
don't
this is
know,
something we have to do. It's a new thing. We have to make it. We're
we
working it.
have to make it together. Since you have experience on it, we have to thrive on it. Okay. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
if
we have to. All
yeah.
this we have to do together with everyone because you can't go it alone on this bumpy ride we have ahead.
I don't know if Ronald wants to add something about creation in this point. Maybe he can share also something.
Yes, thanks
Yes,
for. I
please.
was a little bit late, but I caught a bit of discussion, and especially this part of a legal framework. I think it's kind of important, but also maybe sometimes it can be misleading because many of the people in the sector of this kind of social enterprise and non-profit sector are actually waiting for some solution like legal framework, like something to happen from above to help us kind of strive. We have some experiences. I was working in a group of organizations across Western Balkans countries, so it's kind of from Slovenia eastwards, and we were kind of discussing because all these countries were without any legal framework for social enterprises, for all these kind of value-based enterprises. And we were discussing options how to proceed, and there were a lot of debates, and especially in a situation where, for instance, Slovenia was kind of pushing this kind of legislation. And what happened after this legislation? Actually, no one wanted to be social enterprise because it was so strict. It was so limiting in a way that people actually, even those who were previously kind of promoting themselves as social enterprise, didn't want to become social recognized as enterprise. There were more imposing factors on them than supporting factors. So sometimes legislation, especially when you give actually legislators to do their work without deep consideration of all effects some kind of legislation can have on the sector. So actually in Slovenia it was top-down approach, and the guy who was very passionate about social and economy and all this green economy, all these things, he wanted to be first, and he just copied those from some other countries and just introduced in his own small country, and at the end actually the whole sector went down because it was not well prepared. So sometimes it can be dangerous to have kind of legal framework that is not optimal. So it is always good to think what we can do in the existing legal framework, how we can, of course, create a supporting ecosystem for value-based or purpose-driven organizations to thrive. And what is, in my opinion, is sometimes what we actually are missing is more connected with us, how we as a sector are disorganized or not enough networked or not enough supportive. I believe that because I have more than 20 years in the civil sector, and I have seen all the development in Croatia from the war, post-war situation where you have a lot of funding from the sector, from the external organizations coming to Croatia, giving money to NGOs. But at the end, you have sector which is pretty polarized and seeing each other as a competition. So actually, we start to function as a normal for-profit sector, and actually we didn't have any internal drive to cooperate, to create systems of support, and actually it was a disaster. Now you have kind of a very bad image of social or civil sector in Croatia, but also social enterprise sector is even worse now because we started to do strategy for for eco-social economy in Croatia, and we created the strategy even with the support of politics and high politics, like ministries, where all the ministries were involved. And at one point, everything dissolved because there was not enough critical mass in the sector, and also, of course, there was no sincere support of the high-level politics. But actually, I believe that everything starts with us. If we are well organized, if we can create enough critical mass, maybe few organizations. We have, for instance, created a national cluster for eco-social enterprises, and it failed. And we also created a national network for ethical banking for supporting ethical businesses. And then again, there was not enough because of too much ego, even in the sector. So actually, we really need to find ways how to maybe start from ourselves. Of course, trying to promote and to do something in our external ecosystems. But if we start from ourselves, then I believe we can be more stronger, and actually we can then much better address all these stakeholders, like legislators, like donors or funders or any other sector. So I believe it is always important that we understand that we start from ourselves and then and try to network. And then in this sense, I very much supportive of getting people together, exchange experiences, and do something together.
That's why I think, Ranko, as you were saying that, I think that's why I was also suggesting that we have to create this. I mean, I'm even looking at, if we can create our own contracts between the people and define a way of working and a framework. So, one of the things that we're doing is this kind of open source regenerative innovation hub, what we call slow accelerator ecosystem, is the idea is that, a lot of these companies, as Ranko is saying, they're operating in silos, in isolation. We don't have the same kind of level of network and support as the traditional kind of accelerated Silicon Valley style, So the idea is that if we can, first of all, kind of on one side define what is good and what is purpose, I think that work has to be done anyway, because everybody's kind of more or less knows what that is, but we haven't defined a kind of a universal, generic open source. We don't want to create another religion. We had enough of those and plenty of wars around them. So we want a kind of a universal approach of understanding what goodness is and what goodness means today, because tomorrow good might be slightly different to what it is today. But it has to be an evolving, continuous discussion. But then on the other hand, once we define that, the question is creating this ecosystem that's within this understanding of donut economics type of framework, that we don't want to breach ecological boundaries or social boundaries. So we need to be respectful to our environment and others. So once we all agree that we want to work within this new safe ecological and economical zone, then we start creating these businesses. And the idea is to bring everything together. So I think that a lot of this, it looks like a flower by accident, but what's blossoming here is this sign, the uniting science, business entrepreneurship, what's ecological stewardship and activism, what is education and communication, to bring all that into this new language of regenerative culture and open and invite the old sectors, the old industries, the academia, education, and business entrepreneurs from the traditional sector, what we call this kind of quadruple helix approach, where everybody's open in the discussion, in this co-creation, and the policymakers, the governments, to participate in these projects. So one of the things we're doing now, we just got a COSME awarded by the European Union to do this for the slow fashion and textile and circular economy in textile sector. So the partners that are doing that, we presented this model. They were expecting just a traditional accelerator model, because they were saying, how do we get funds? How do we help these companies grow? But we presented this model and we got the grant, so I was very happy that we have the opportunity now to, for example, try this out in the fashion and textile sector. And the idea is to get these kind of good advisors, good mentors, good coaches. We have to define all these things from scratch. What do we mean by good? But the good funding, which is the patient capital, the public funding, which is a bit agnostic to, all these very strict requirements sometimes that come from private capital in terms of growth and so on. But also the legal financial services, what Ranko was saying is maybe we have to define our own legal framework based on contracts that we define, or the open IP management. There is a lot of knowledge out there that we can bring together in terms of intellectual property management, data management. How do you manage data in a good way, in a regenerative way? Because we know that the way data is being managed and exploited by the traditional platforms is, leading us to what's called surveillance capitalism, and we need to move away from that. So we know that the algorithms have to be good, because if the algorithms are not good, if they are racist, if they're discriminatory, if they are exploitative, all those things in our behavior and our value system end up in those algorithms. And AI is going to be extremely a big part of our life in a not so long future. In the next 5 years, we see AI taking over a lot of jobs. We see a lot of automation of jobs and service industry. So we need to create these new businesses based on creating new value, human value, because a lot of our work will be automated. So this ecosystem has to be developed to allow these new companies to develop and to thrive. Then there's distributed ledger technology, and so on. That's coming also. So the idea is to take the best of what we know from the traditional world. We're in this transition as we know. And I was just showing this. I like this little graph that shows, where we are in terms of, the conservatives now. We see that a lot of pushback in terms of trying to maintain the status quo, but this innovation curve has always been happening. The famous S curve here that keeps going on. We are at a tipping point. We've passed the tipping point now. We're perhaps here in terms of where we are in the previous crisis. Where we're in the crisis now of the previous system. So this new, as Giles was saying, is emerging now from behind, and we're like here, perhaps, coming up here.
Yeah.
Hopefully we made it so far. But the idea is that we now have to create this new economy that's inclusive and regenerative and so on, and hope that the next economy is going to be this one. And some of the work I did, I think this is in terms of just putting us in perspective in terms of where we are, because I love this. It really helps me understand. Yeah, although it looks like a complex piece of slide, they say don't put too many text on the slide. But I just want to explain that, for me, this is really fundamental, because our history, although it goes back 200,000 years when we walked out of Africa, the real kind of revolutionary kind of what led to this huge growth in carbon emissions and all that started with the agricultural revolution. But also there's always been a technological progress that's determined our progress. And it's been very much aligned with the philosophies that we decided that, or the philosophies that were driving that or framing that technology. So we see that the writing of the scriptures that was from previous oral traditions that went into books, into Sanskrit text, gave rise to, the great religions of monotheism that was very much aligned with agrarian, what became patriarchal societies and religious empires, which was a way of organizing people. It became a very powerful political tool. That's why this line is political and economic. Political tool to get us to the next phase, which was, led to the scientific revolution that rejected pretty much most of that. So this kind of went into second plane. It went into the second, level, let's say, but it continues behind on that. But the scientific revolution tried to redefine, how we understand the world in this reductionist and atomic way, which helped us hugely in advancing technologically. And Nietzsche said the death of God, but many other philosophers at that time were talking about the death of God, because we lost essentially to some extent meaning, although many of the early Enlightenment philosophers were very much exploring what meaning and purpose was all about. But that just became noise after a while. And we got into this industrial, very mechanistic revolution that led to, the growth of capitalism and these states as a way of exploiting, through military organizations and colonialism, essentially to extract resources and to be able to bring those into the industries and to allow them to grow. So again, this phase, what we saw in the 70s for 50 years, it's been going on. And some people say it was thanks to the technology of going to the moon and taking that photo of the Earth. that we were able to get this perspective that the earth is not flat, even though we probably knew it because they told us, but to see it as a whole, one blue home where we live, that sparked off a lot of the environmental movement as a global movement, not as something that nature lovers and naturists and people who were writing books like David Thoreau and Huxley and people that were exploring these kind of things. But we're now talking about a massive global revolution that started 50 years ago that has this new perspective that's considering the Gaia and each other, because thanks to the internet, thanks to data, we have this transparency, we see each other, we have this global presence, we see humanity as a whole, that essentially is making a lot of these old arguments to some extent obsolete. And this is there's a lot of kickback from old institutions and organizations to maintain their power and status quo, which is a totally natural process. And that's where the conservatives, in that curve come at the top. And I think that what we're seeing is a massive, now, this I put this thick line here because it's a massive shift to a completely different way of thinking that is kind of turning upside down everything we learned from a reductionist point of view in the microcosm and so on. Now we're like zooming back out to this macrocosm, Gaia, system thinking, ecosystem thinking. And now we're going to bring these two back together. And what happened in the great religions is there was a lot of explorations, but thanks to the yogis and the ascetics and all the shamans in any tradition, any ancient tradition, that have always been exploring these questions of who am I, where am I, and all that. So we got this ancient wisdom and intuition and emotional and spiritual intelligence, but then we lost it through the Enlightenment period because we got so focused on the industrial development. So what we see now is this recovery of what I call the rise of matriarchy, because the female and the young that have this longer term vision, the female energy, I'm saying, within all of us, is a fundamental part of this recovery, and that's why we see so many women rising in this movement and in this even entrepreneurship in business. And just to understanding the time limits, just to say that I'm also thankful that the Triple Bottom Line Business Association that I became a member of this year, today actually it was 2 weeks ago, they celebrated that the board of directors is now, the chair is a woman now, and the majority of the board are female, and they were celebrating that. Of course, everybody's supporting them. So we see that there is a shift in mindset. The feminist movement in Spain is seen as a threat, to the far right, for example, who are against diversity and so on, because they want to maintain a traditional conservative viewpoint. I think it's totally valid and it's understandable, the fear of diversity, the fear of change, the fear of the complexity that, this new way of thinking demands. It creates a huge amount of fear. And, a lot of people want to retreat back to the comfort zone of nostalgia and so on. But, I would say that to the young people who are coming out of university saying, what on the heck I'm going to do, in this, very different to how it was for me, where you kind of had your CV, you had to send it out, and you kind of knew you land a job, or my in-laws or my parents, not my parents because they were migrants, but my in-laws who got a job in a bank, when they were 18 and they had the same job for life. Many people in Spain still had this expectation. And now we're in a completely different game, where we have to go back to how it is in many developing countries. I have to say that people are entrepreneurs. They have 3 jobs. They are very creative. Sometimes, of course, they many times struggle very much because they live in very unfair, unjust economies, a lot of corruption. But in Europe, we have privilege to live in a very advanced, in terms of the institutions and everything progress that Europe has done. So now I think the youth in Europe can be part of this creativity and embracing, their human abilities to adapt and to create new businesses. And we all have to support each other. We were taught that we are alone. that we are these isolated, individualistic creatures, that, we have our little nuclear families and so on. And that was an industrial mindset. We have to break those mindsets because we're communities, we're human. We are, what it says here, we're localized, virtual, and transboundary communities. We're global. We have to see that we are part of this community and we have a responsibility to act. So this is a little bit what I'm trying to do. My little part with Human Nation is to bring this into business, the lexicon, business, and also to create this ecosystem that we were talking about. So I'm not going to, this shift from ego to echo. We've seen it all, and the businesses. I had directors in my company, the corporation I used to work for. Okay, so they would say.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, the time is up, no?
I'm so sorry. I would just like to ask you a question.
Yes, please do. Please do. Yeah, I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. I just noticed the time.
So the question is, how can we use this pandemic to help us shift to a more balanced and equitable society that embraces matriarchal models to look at longevity, collaboration, and caring?
Wow. Okay, so I think, I even made some notes on that, but I will just, I think
it's more or less what you are saying about
yes.
that shift that we have to transition from the neoliberal capitalism point of view and this kind of shift. And you also mentioned the woman role on it. As a woman, I have to say that we women also have the role for us to shift for a female mentality, even though we are women, because many women are women but are not using the female energy. It's not just a question of being a woman, but also embracing what really is matriarchal point of view and in balance with patriarchal. So I don't know if you could reinforce what you are regarding the question that Beatriz was saying, how you really, in women and in men, we also support this matriarchal that you mentioned in this.
I think a very good one of the articles I came across was like how consumerism was like being so threatened by the COVID, because people were at home with their families and they were locked down, and they realized that 90% of the things they thought were important to have as things were not actually so important. That they survived, like they came out of the other end and they were alive and they were sane. And in fact, perhaps, a lot of, I think my experience was, of course, it was tough, but they talk about this great pause and forced mass meditation that COVID brought. And I think that, it has made us reflect. I think, 20% of people were already, maybe 10% were already there. Another 10% maybe joined the group, let's say, of this kind of new way of thinking. I see it a little bit like the organic food. First it was a few people buying some organic food because they worried about their health. They worried about pesticides. They worried about their children health. They worried about the impact on farming, on land, on water. And then it's become, it's on the supermarket shelves. So it takes time. But I think the shift has happened. It's been another shift, as Giles was saying, because it's all these waves coming, but there's been waves behind. The 2008 financial crisis obviously wasn't enough. So we need more. We need more crisis, and we will have more. There will be, and we have to get used to more crisis now, because I think when we're going through this shift, there'll be more and more crises. They'll be coming like aftershocks more and more often before we come through it, either alive or dead as a civilization. I hope we are part of the story to make that be different, that we're going to come out thriving. I'm an optimist. And I think that the COVID, the women and the youth will give us the vision and the light that we need. And absolutely what you said is the female energy we're talking about, the longer term thinking, the caring, the loving, the embracing, the way you hold a child, that kind of, the way you care for the earth, that kind of energy has to be at the forefront of our attention now, to heal and to make business as a vehicle for change, as an activism, to bring that energy, and create the ecosystem, not go alone. We have to make the ecosystem and community, we have all the tools, we have all the knowledge, and bring this ancient wisdom connected to the accelerators, connected to the growth hackathons and hubs and platforms and digital tools and algorithms, and unite them into a solution as a community. And here we go. We're ready. You're on mute, Liliana.
Yeah, I was on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was great to have you. I think Alejandra had the question, but we are just on point. Basically, no. It was lovely to hear you, so we continue hearing you. But I think Alejandra can still make her question. It's a very simple question, so.
Yes, I just want to congratulate you for such a nice sharing. And for the people that are interested in this topic, where can we learn more about your work and your projects?
Oh, yes, very simple. I'll give you a very, very simple answer here with these slides here. I got the last slide, hopefully. Oh, here it is. So I just put it on screen so that when the video is also grabbed, I put some information there, but also my contact detail is there. And this is a startup. It's a fourth sector purpose startup. So I hope we can all be part of building it, or each of ourselves, each one building it in their own way, but working together. So it's a peer-to-peer open source network startup that I hope we can work together to build. Yeah,
we would love to work with you in the same page. So hopefully, I just want to ask to Alexandra to unmute her micro.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Sharam. You'll pursue this talk for sure between us and Ranko too, because we are here in Europe. Maybe we can start something as an Europeans. We have some kind of responsibility since the industrial mindset came from here. So we also have been more the pioneers of the regenerative mindset. So we have forces to do it, okay?